Daniel Carter was halfway through lunch when he noticed her. The woman sat alone at a small table near the window of the Riverside Bistro, studying the menu as if it contained the answer to a problem she could not solve. She looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from a bad night's sleep, the kind that settles into a person after months of carrying too much weight alone. Across the room, Daniel watched as she quietly counted a few crumpled bills hidden inside her wallet. Then she looked toward the prices again. Her shoulders stiffened. A few seconds later, she closed the menu. No meal, no order, no complaint, just a polite smile to the server and a slow walk toward the exit. Most people never would have noticed, but Daniel did, because years earlier, he had been that person, the person pretending not to be hungry, the person calculating whether dignity was worth more than dinner, the person smiling while silently falling apart. As the restaurant door closed behind her, something inside Daniel refused to let the moment pass. He stood up. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know that the woman who had just walked away from a meal she couldn't afford would soon change his life forever. And he certainly didn't know that one simple act of kindness would uncover a painful secret, a little girl fighting beside her mother, and a battle against a powerful man who had already destroyed too many lives. What happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it. And before this story continues, take a moment to tell us, have you ever received kindness from a stranger when you needed it most? Share your answer in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that sometimes a single open door can change an entire life. Now, let's begin. The quiet river town of Maplewood had always been the kind of place where people believed they knew one another. Neighbors waved from porches. Store owners remembered customers by name. Children rode bicycles through tree-lined streets while parents chatted near school fences. From the outside, it looked like the sort of community where nobody ever truly struggled alone. But appearances could be deceptive, because hidden behind neat houses and polite smiles were people carrying burdens no one else could see. Sarah Mitchell was one of them. Every morning began before sunrise. She would wake in the small apartment she shared with her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, long before the alarm clock rang, not because she was rested, but because worry rarely allowed her to sleep deeply anymore. The apartment was clean but cramped. The wallpaper peeled slightly near the kitchen window. The heating system worked only when it felt like cooperating. The refrigerator contained just enough food to reach the next paycheck if she planned every meal carefully. Sarah had become an expert at planning. She knew exactly how much milk remained in the carton, exactly how many slices of bread were left in the package, exactly how much money sat in her bank account at any given moment, and every day felt like a balancing act performed above a cliff. Yet Emma never knew. That was the one thing Sarah protected at all costs. To Emma, life still felt like an adventure. The little girl filled the apartment with questions, laughter, drawings taped to the walls, and endless stories about school. Whenever Emma asked if everything was okay, Sarah always smiled. "Everything's fine, sweetheart." Even when it wasn't. Especially when it wasn't. After dropping Emma at school each morning, Sarah spent long hours working laundry jobs paid mostly in cash. The work was exhausting. Her hands were constantly dry from detergent. Her back ached from lifting heavy loads. The pay barely covered rent, but it was honest work. And after everything she had been through, honesty mattered more than comfort. There had been a time when Sarah believed someone would rescue her. A time when she believed promises. A time when she trusted people who claimed they wanted to help. Those lessons had been expensive. Now she trusted almost no one. The only person she allowed close was Emma. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Carter's life looked completely different. At 38, he owned a successful consulting company that worked with businesses throughout the Pacific Northwest. His office overlooked the river. His calendar stayed booked weeks in advance. His company employed dozens of people. From the outside, Daniel appeared to have everything. Success, respect, financial security, a future most people could only dream about. But success had not protected him from loss. 3 years earlier, his wife Caroline had died after a long battle with cancer. The grief had nearly broken him. For months, he moved through life like a man walking underwater. Every room in the house reminded him of her. Every holiday felt incomplete. Every achievement felt strangely empty, because she was no longer there to celebrate beside him. The only thing that kept him moving forward was his son, Ethan. At 7 years old, Ethan had inherited Caroline's bright smile and gentle heart. Whenever Daniel felt himself slipping into sadness, Ethan somehow pulled him back toward the light. Still, loneliness remained. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind people noticed. Just the quiet loneliness of eating dinner across from an empty chair. The loneliness of reaching for a hand that was no longer there. The loneliness of carrying memories no one else fully understood. Because of those experiences, Daniel had developed a habit. He paid attention. He noticed things. The tired cashier who looked like she hadn't slept. The elderly man eating alone every Tuesday afternoon. The teenager trying to hide embarrassment while counting coins. Most people walked past such moments. Daniel couldn't. He remembered too clearly what it felt like when someone had noticed him during his hardest years, and that memory stayed with him. Which was why, on that seemingly ordinary Saturday afternoon at Riverside Bistro, the sight of a woman quietly leaving without ordering affected him so deeply. He recognized something familiar in her expression. Not hunger, not poverty, pride. The kind of pride that keeps people standing when life has given them every reason to collapse. The kind of pride that whispers, keep walking. Don't let them see you struggle. Don't ask for help. As Daniel drove home that evening, he could not stop thinking about her. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He didn't even know whether he would ever see her again. Yet something told him their paths had crossed for a reason. Neither of them could have imagined what was about to happen. Neither of them knew that a chance encounter in a small riverside restaurant would eventually lead to friendship, healing, trust, and a second chance neither believed they deserved. And most importantly, neither of them knew that the greatest gift they would give each other had nothing to do with money. It would be something far more valuable. The courage to believe in people again. And that journey was only beginning. For the next 2 weeks, Daniel Carter tried to forget about the woman from the bistro. He told himself it was none of his business. People crossed paths every day. Some encounters lasted a few seconds and disappeared forever. Life moved on. Yet every time he remembered the way she had quietly folded the menu and walked out without ordering, something unsettled him. It wasn't pity. Daniel hated pity. Pity looked down on people. What he felt was recognition. Years ago, before success found him, he had worn that same expression. The expression of someone determined not to let the world see how difficult things had become. One Thursday afternoon, after finishing a meeting near Riverside Park, Daniel decided to take a walk before returning to the office. The autumn air was cool and crisp. Golden leaves drifted from the trees and spun across the walking paths. Children laughed from the playground, while parents watched nearby. The scene felt peaceful. Daniel carried a paperback novel and sat on a bench overlooking the river. For nearly 20 minutes, he read quietly. Then he looked up and froze. It was her, the woman from the restaurant. She sat alone on a bench about 50 feet away. This time she wasn't alone. A little girl was playing nearby on the swings. The child couldn't have been older than 6. She had bright blonde curls and an energy that seemed impossible to contain. She pumped her legs enthusiastically, trying to swing higher and higher while laughing at something only she understood. The woman watched her constantly, not casually, protectively, like someone who had learned that the world could change in a single moment. Daniel immediately understood something he hadn't realized before. The money she lacked at the restaurant hadn't been for one person. It had been for 2. His chest tightened. He looked back at his book. The last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable. Several minutes passed. The little girl continued playing. The woman noticed him. Daniel saw it happen. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, he thought she might gather her daughter and leave. Instead, she remained where she was. Neither of them spoke. Daniel simply turned a page and continued reading. The next week, he returned to the same park. And then again a few days later. Sometimes he saw her. Sometimes he didn't. Whenever she appeared, he respected the distance between them. No conversation. No pressure. No attempts to help. Just two adults sitting quietly while children played, and autumn slowly turned toward winter. Over time, something began to change. The tension in her shoulders eased. She stopped watching him like a potential threat. The silence became comfortable. One afternoon, nearly a month after their first encounter at the restaurant, an unexpected interruption changed everything. Daniel was sitting on his usual bench when a young man approached. The young man looked nervous, maybe 20 years old. He wore a worn sweatshirt and carried a backpack filled with textbooks. "Mr. Carter?" he asked cautiously. Daniel looked up. "Yes?" The young man's face brightened. "I hoped it was you." Daniel studied him for a moment before recognition appeared. "Marcus?" The young man smiled. "You remember me?" "Of course I do." Marcus Reyes had once lived in a homeless shelter Daniel quietly supported. 2 years earlier, Marcus had been struggling to finish high school while helping care for his younger siblings. Daniel had never given him money directly. Instead, he had helped fund a scholarship program through a local community organization. Marcus had been one of the students who benefited. "I'm attending college now," Marcus said proudly. "Business administration." "That's wonderful." Marcus nodded. "I just wanted to thank you. People told me the donations were anonymous, but eventually I figured it out." Daniel laughed softly. "Then they weren't very anonymous." Marcus grinned. "No, sir." For a few moments they talked about school, work, and future plans. Before leaving, Marcus extended his hand. "You changed my life." Daniel shook it firmly. "No." Marcus looked confused. "You changed your own life. I just opened a door." The young man stood silently for a second. Then he nodded. "I'll remember that." After Marcus walked away, Daniel noticed movement from the nearby bench. The woman was watching him, not suspiciously, curiously. For the first time, the wall between them seemed slightly lower. A few minutes later, the little girl came running toward them. Children had a remarkable ability to ignore social rules adults considered important. She stopped directly in front of Daniel. "Mama," she called over her shoulder. "That's the man from the restaurant." The woman immediately stood. "Emma, don't bother people. It's okay," Daniel said gently. He smiled at the little girl. "Hi." Emma tilted her head. "You really are the restaurant man." "I suppose I am." She considered this. Then she asked the question only a child would ask. "Do you still eat chicken tenders?" Daniel laughed. The sound surprised even him. "I do, actually." Emma smiled proudly, as if she had solved a mystery. The woman finally approached. She looked embarrassed but not angry. "I'm sorry. No need." For a moment neither spoke. Then she surprised him. "I appreciate something." Daniel waited. "You never pushed." The statement was simple, but he understood its importance. "Everyone deserves space," he replied. She studied him carefully, as if evaluating whether she believed that. Finally, she nodded. "My name is Sarah." "Daniel." She glanced toward Emma, who was now investigating a pile of leaves. Then back at him. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything." A faint smile appeared. "Maybe not, but I'd like to give one." For the first time, Daniel saw genuine warmth behind her guarded expression. Not complete trust. Not yet, but something closer than before. The beginning of trust. The beginning of possibility. The beginning of a story neither of them could yet understand. As the afternoon sunlight reflected across the river, Sarah looked toward the water and took a slow breath. "There are reasons," she said quietly, "why I don't accept help from strangers." Daniel remained silent. He sensed that whatever came next would matter a great deal. Sarah looked down at her hands. Then she raised her eyes to meet his. "What happened to me started 2 years ago, and for the first time, She began telling the truth about the man who had nearly destroyed her life. Sarah stared at the river for several seconds before speaking. The autumn wind carried fallen leaves across the walking path, while Emma chased squirrels nearby, completely unaware that her mother was about to reveal one of the most painful chapters of her life. 2 years ago, Sarah began quietly, I thought my problems were finally ending. Daniel remained silent. He had learned long ago that people shared difficult truths only when they felt safe enough to do so. Interrupting rarely helped. My daughter's father left when Emma was 4, Sarah continued. One day he simply packed his things and disappeared. No warning, no explanation, no support. She forced a small smile. At first I kept telling myself he would come back, but he didn't. The words sounded practiced, as though she had repeated them many times in her own mind. I had no recent work experience because I'd spent years raising Emma. Every company I applied to saw a single mother with a gap in her resume and decided someone else was easier. Daniel nodded slightly. Unfortunately, he knew how often that happened. For months I searched for work, Sarah said. Every interview ended the same way. They smiled politely and promised to call. They never did. Emma's laughter drifted across the park. Sarah watched her daughter for a moment before continuing. Then I met Richard Hale. The name immediately changed her expression. The softness vanished. Her shoulders tightened. Her eyes hardened. Daniel noticed everything. Richard owned several small companies, she said. He seemed successful, professional, respectable. At least that's what everyone believed. At first, Richard had appeared generous. He offered Sarah a position with flexible hours and reasonable pay. For the first time in months, she felt hope. She rented a better apartment, bought healthier food, stopped worrying about every dollar. Most importantly, she believed Emma's future might finally become stable. I thought he saved us, Sarah admitted. The bitterness in her voice made it clear how wrong she had been. Then things started changing. At first the requests were small. Stay late, attend dinner meetings, smile more around clients, dress differently. Nothing serious enough to justify quitting. Nothing obvious enough to explain to other people. But each request pushed a little further than the one before. And every time Sarah hesitated, Richard reminded her how difficult life had been before he helped. He wanted gratitude, she said quietly, but gratitude was never enough. Daniel felt anger rise inside him. Not surprise, no truck, just anger, because he had seen men like Richard before. Men who used power as leverage, men who disguised control as kindness, men who offered opportunities with invisible strings attached. When I finally refused, Sarah continued, he became someone completely different. Her hands trembled slightly. She folded them together. He told me I owed him. The wind seemed colder now. He said no one else would ever hire me. He said I should remember where I came from. He said I was making a terrible mistake. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sarah looked toward the river. I quit the next day. For a moment, Daniel felt relieved. Then, he saw the sadness in her eyes. The story wasn't finished. Leaving wasn't the hard part, she said. The hard part came afterward. Richard Hale was well connected. He knew business owners, hiring managers, local executives, people who trusted his opinion. And he used every one of those relationships. Every interview suddenly disappeared. Every application was rejected. People stopped returning my calls. At first, Sarah thought it was coincidence. Eventually, she learned the truth. Richard had been contacting employers behind the scenes, telling them she was dishonest, unreliable, manipulative, a problem employee. None of it was true. But lies travel quickly when spoken by powerful people. Within months, Sarah lost nearly everything. Her savings disappeared. Her apartment was gone. The car was sold. The bills piled higher and higher. Eventually, she and Emma moved into a shelter. Daniel lowered his eyes. He could only imagine how terrifying that must have been, especially with a child. We stayed there 4 months, Sarah said. 4 months trying to survive. She swallowed hard. I promised Emma it was temporary. Every night I prayed I wasn't lying. For several moments, neither spoke. The sounds of children playing filled the silence. Finally, Daniel asked softly, "How did you get out?" A small smile appeared. Tiny steps. She explained how she found laundry work paid in cash, how she accepted every shift available, how she skipped meals so Emma could eat better food, how she slowly saved enough money for a small apartment. Nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, just relentless effort. Day after day, week after week, month after month. When she finished speaking, the silence between them felt different, not uncomfortable, meaningful. Sarah looked at Daniel carefully. "Now do you understand?" "I think so." "No." She shook her head. "You understand why I don't trust help." Daniel considered her words, then nodded. "You're right." That answer surprised her. Most people tried to convince her she was wrong. Danielle didn't. I would probably feel the same way. For the first time, Sarah genuinely smiled, not because he solved anything, because he listened. A few moments later, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. Sarah immediately tensed. The reaction was automatic. Years of experience had taught her to be cautious. Daniel noticed. Slowly, he removed a business card. Nothing more. No money. No promises. No pressure. He placed it gently on the bench between them. "My company needs an administrative assistant." Sarah stared at the card. Daniel continued. "This isn't charity. There would be an interview, a contract, a probation period, a real salary." She looked from the card to his face. Suspicion battled with hope. Hope hadn't won many battles lately. "I'm not asking for an answer today," Daniel said. "If you're interested, call. If you're not, that's okay too." Sarah remained silent. The card sat between them, a small rectangle of paper. Yet it felt heavier than anything she had carried in years, because it represented something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a very long time. A genuine opportunity. Not a favor, not a debt, not a trap. As the sun began to set behind the river, Daniel stood. "It was nice meeting you properly, Sarah." Then he walked away. Sarah watched him disappear down the path. The business card remained in her hand. For the rest of the evening, she kept staring at it, and for the first time in years, a dangerous thought entered her mind. Maybe not every door led to pain. Maybe, just maybe, one door could finally lead somewhere better. But trusting again would require courage. And courage had become the one thing she was no longer certain she possessed. For 3 days, Sarah Mitchell carried Daniel Carter's business card everywhere she went. It sat inside her purse while she worked long hours at the laundry facility. It rested beside her bed at night. Sometimes she took it out and stared at it for several minutes before putting it away again. Emma noticed. "Mama, why do you keep looking at that card?" Sarah smiled. "No reason, sweetheart." But there was a reason. The card represented a choice, and choices had become dangerous. Every important decision she had made in the past few years had led to disappointment, betrayal, or loss. Trusting Richard Hale had nearly destroyed her life. Now another successful businessman was offering an opportunity. How could she know this would be different? The answer was simple. She couldn't. That uncertainty terrified her. On the 4th morning, Sarah sat alone at her kitchen table after dropping Emma off at school. A cup of coffee cooled beside her. Bills were spread across the table. Rent, utilities, groceries, school expenses. The numbers never seemed to stop growing. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, she simply listened to the silence. Then she picked up the business card. Before fear could change her mind, she dialed the number. The phone rang twice. A cheerful voice answered. "Carter Strategic Consulting. This is Megan Brooks." Sarah almost hung up. Instead, she forced herself to speak. "My name is Sarah Mitchell." There was a brief pause. "I'm calling about an administrative assistant position." Within minutes, an interview was scheduled for the following Monday. When the call ended, Sarah stared at the phone. Her heart was racing. She wasn't sure whether she had just made a brilliant decision or a terrible mistake. Monday arrived faster than she expected. Sarah spent nearly an hour choosing what to wear. Not because she owned many options. Quite the opposite. Her choices were limited. Eventually, she selected a navy blue dress she had carefully preserved from better days. She ironed it twice, polished her shoes, printed a fresh copy of her resume. Then, she stood in front of the mirror. For a moment, she barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, because she looked hopeful, and hope felt unfamiliar. The office building overlooked the river. Its glass exterior reflected the morning sunlight. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early. Old habits. When life had repeatedly punished mistakes, punctuality became a survival skill. Inside, the reception area felt warm and professional. Nothing extravagant, nothing intimidating. Just organized. Efficient. Respectful. The receptionist greeted her with a smile. A few minutes later, Megan Brooks appeared. Sarah immediately noticed something unexpected. Megan was confident, profesional, and completely in charge. The realization eased a small part of her anxiety. She had worried about walking into another environment controlled entirely by one powerful man. Instead, she found a leadership team that appeared balanced. The interview began promptly. Megan led most of the conversation. Daniel participated, but he never dominated the discussion. That detail mattered more than Sarah expected. They asked about organization, scheduling, communication, problem solving, time management. Questions designed to understand her abilities rather than her personal life. For the first time in years, Sarah felt treated like a professional instead of a problem. When Megan asked about managing pressure, Sarah answered honestly, "I'm used to handling multiple crises at the same time." Daniel smiled slightly. "I believe that." The interview continued. As the minutes passed, Sarah found herself relaxing. Her answers became more confident, more natural. By the end, she almost forgot to be nervous. Then came the moment she hadn't expected. Daniel slid a folder across the table. "A job offer," he said. Sarah blinked. "What?" Megan nodded. "We'd like to bring you on for a 3-month probation period." For several seconds, Sarah simply stared. She had prepared herself for rejection, prepared herself for disappointment, prepared herself to leave and continue searching. She had not prepared herself for success. Daniel spoke gently. "Take it home. Read every page. Have someone review it if you'd like. You don't need to decide today." Sarah opened the folder. The salary was fair. The benefits were real. The expectations were clearly defined. Most importantly, everything was written down. Nothing hidden, nothing vague, nothing dependent on personal favors. It looked like a genuine professional agreement. Still, fear whispered in the back of her mind. What if this was another mistake? What if she trusted again and paid the price? As if sensing her hesitation, Megan placed a glass of water beside her. No pressure, no sales pitch, just patience. Sarah looked from Megan to Daniel, then back to the contract. Slowly, she realized something important. These people weren't asking for trust. They were earning it. One action at a time, one conversation at a time, one respectful choice at a time. For years, Sarah had been waiting for the hidden condition, the secret cost, the moment when kindness transformed into control. It never came. She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from possibility. Then she signed. As the ink dried on the paper, Sarah felt something shift deep inside her. The future wasn't secure. The past wasn't erased. Life wasn't suddenly easy. But for the first time, in a very long while, a door had opened. And this time, she had chosen to walk through it herself. Sarah's first week at Carter Strategic Consulting felt strangely unreal. Every morning, she expected something to go wrong. She expected someone to tell her there had been a mistake. She expected the opportunity to disappear as suddenly as it had appeared. But it didn't. Monday became Tuesday. Tuesday became Wednesday. And each day looked remarkably similar. People arrived on time, meetings were organized, questions were answered professionally. Employees treated one another with respect. Nobody shouted, nobody manipulated, nobody demanded gratitude. For Sarah, the normality felt almost suspicious. Years of hardship had trained her to expect hidden dangers, yet none appeared. On her third day, Daniel called her into his office. Instantly, her stomach tightened. Old memories surfaced. Richard Hale had often started difficult conversations exactly the same way. "Can you step into my office for a moment?" The phrase alone was enough to make her anxious. Sarah knocked softly and entered. "You wanted to see me?" Daniel looked up from his laptop. "Yes. Please sit down." She sat. Her pulse quickened. Daniel opened a file. "I noticed something in the scheduling system." Sarah's heart sank. A mistake. Of course, she knew it. She had ruined everything already. Daniel turned the monitor toward her. "There's a conflict between 2 client meetings next Thursday." Sarah studied the calendar. Within seconds, she found the issue. "E8. You also found the solution?" She nodded. "I can move the Chicago meeting to Wednesday afternoon and keep the Portland client on Thursday." Daniel smiled. "Perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd suggest." Sarah blinked. That was it? No criticism. No humiliation. No threats. Just a problem and a solution. The realization left her oddly emotional. When she returned to her desk, she sat quietly for several minutes. A small scheduling error had not become a catastrophe. It had simply been corrected. The experience felt almost revolutionary. By the second week, Sarah began settling into her role. She discovered that she was good at the work. Very good. Years of managing a household on an impossible budget had sharpened her organizational skills. Years of solving problems alone had taught her how to prioritize under pressure. While others saw gaps in her resume, real life had been teaching her valuable skills all along. Soon, coworkers began seeking her assistance. Not because they felt sorry for her, because she was competent. One afternoon, Megan stopped by her desk. "I need to tell you something." Sarah immediately looked worried. Megan laughed softly. "It's good news." Sarah relaxed slightly. "Okay, the client satisfaction reports came in this morning, and the healthcare account specifically mentioned your work." Sarah stared. "What?" Megan handed her a printed email. The client had written several paragraphs praising Sarah's communication, professionalism, and attention to detail. At the bottom was a simple sentence: "Sarah Mitchell made this entire process easier for our team." For a long moment, Sarah couldn't speak. No employer had complimented her in years. The feeling was unfamiliar, almost overwhelming. That evening, she carried a copy of the email home. Emma was coloring at the kitchen table when Sarah walked through the door. "You look happy," Emma announced immediately. Sarah laughed. "Do we?" "Very." Children noticed everything. Sarah sat beside her daughter. "Something nice happened at work today." Emma put down her crayons. "What happened?" "A client said I did a good job." Emma smiled, as though her mother had just won an Olympic medal. "I knew you would." Sarah felt tears threaten unexpectedly. Children had an incredible way of believing in people, especially the people they loved. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat alone in the living room. The apartment was quiet. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. She found herself thinking about Daniel. Not romantically. Not yet. Just thoughtfully. He had given her an opportunity. But more importantly, he had respected her boundaries. He never treated her like a charity project. Never reminded her of what he had done. Never expected anything in return. The more she observed him, the more she realized his kindness was consistent. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't something he switched on when people were watching. It was simply who he was. The realization frightened her, because trust was beginning to return. Slowly, carefully, against her better judgment. A few days later, Sarah arrived early and found Daniel already in the office. He was standing near the coffee machine reading documents. "Morning," he said. "Morning." For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah surprised herself. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really hire me?" Daniel looked genuinely confused. "Because you were qualified." "No," Sarah said softly. "There were probably other applicants." "There were. And?" Daniel set down his coffee. "Sarah, A lot of people looked at your resume and saw problems. She waited. I looked at your resume and saw someone who survived things most people wouldn't survive. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Daniel continued. You kept going. You protected your daughter. You rebuilt your life. Those things matter. Sarah looked away before he could see the emotion in her eyes. For years, people had judged her by what she had lost. For the first time, someone was recognizing what she had overcome. And in that moment, without fully realizing it, Sarah took another small step toward trusting again. Not because someone demanded it, not because someone earned it overnight, but because kindness, when repeated often enough, slowly becomes believable. By early spring, Sarah had been working at Carter Strategic Consulting for nearly 4 months. For the first time in years, life felt stable. The bills were paid on time. Emma had new shoes that actually fit. The refrigerator stayed full throughout the week. Most importantly, Sarah no longer woke up every morning wondering how she would survive the next month. She had earned her place. Everyone in the office knew it. Her probation period had ended successfully. Clients respected her. Coworkers trusted her. Even Megan often relied on her to coordinate important projects. Little by little, the fear that had followed Sarah for so long began to loosen its grip. But the past was not finished with her yet. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was working at a satellite office across town when an unfamiliar visitor walked into the company's main headquarters. The receptionist greeted him politely. He was well-dressed, confident, charming, the kind of man who knew how to make a good first impression. Janet, the receptionist, asked for his name. The moment he answered, her expression changed. She immediately contacted Megan, and within minutes, Daniel was sitting inside a conference room. Across the table sat Richard Hale, the man who had nearly destroyed Sarah's life. Richard smiled comfortably, as though he belonged there, as though nothing had happened. For several minutes he spoke about potential business opportunities, partnerships, consulting projects, future growth. Daniel listened quietly. Megan listened even more quietly. Neither interrupted. Neither reacted. Finally, Richard casually mentioned Sarah's name. I noticed Sarah Mitchell works here now. The room became very still. Richard leaned back in his chair. I thought I should mention that she and I have a complicated history. Daniel said nothing. Richard continued. There are certain things about her character that responsible employers should probably know. The smile on Megan's face disappeared instantly. She opened a folder that had been sitting on the table. Inside were documents, performance reviews, client feedback, internal evaluations. She slid several pages across the table. Let's discuss character, Megan said calmly. Richard looked confused. Megan pointed to the first report. 90-day evaluation. Outstanding performance. She turned another page. Client satisfaction scores in the top 10%. Another page. 2 written commendations from major clients. Another. Cost-saving recommendations that saved the company thousands of dollars. Richard's smile weakened. Megan continued. And now, let's discuss your character. For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable. She removed another document, an email from several years earlier, then another, and another, a growing collection of complaints, reports, and statements involving former female employees. The color slowly drained from Richard's face. You've been keeping records? He asked. Yes. Megan's voice remained calm, long before Sarah ever worked here. Richard shifted in his seat. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. Megan closed the folder. I'm informing you that this company will not tolerate any attempt to damage the reputation of one of our employees. Daniel finally spoke. His voice was steady, controlled. Firm. Sarah earned her position here. If you contact her, this company, or any of our clients regarding her again, our legal team will respond immediately. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. For perhaps the first time in many years, he realized intimidation wasn't working. 3 minutes later, he left the building. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no threats, Just consequences. Real consequences. The kind powerful people rarely expected. The following morning, Sarah arrived at work unaware of what had happened. Megan called her into a meeting. For a brief moment, old fears returned. Then Megan handed her a memo explaining everything. Sarah read the document slowly, twice. When she finished, she looked up. Neither Daniel nor Megan appeared concerned. Neither expected gratitude. Neither acted like heroes. They had simply protected an employee, exactly as any responsible employer should. Tears threatened to form in Sarah's eyes. Not because Richard had returned, because for the first time, someone had stood beside her instead of stepping aside. Someone had believed her. Someone had defended her. Not out of pity, out of principle. After a long silence, Sarah looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "You shouldn't have needed to ask." At that moment, Sarah understood something important. Healing wasn't just about escaping the past. Sometimes, healing meant discovering that the people around you were not like the people who hurt you. And for the first time in years, the shadow Richard Hale had cast over her life began to disappear. Spring arrived quietly that year. The rain became less frequent. The days grew longer. And for the first time in a very long while, Sarah found herself looking forward to the future instead of fearing it. Life was still busy. There were school schedules, work deadlines, grocery lists, and all the ordinary responsibilities that came with raising a child. But the constant feeling of survival had begun to fade. For the first time in years, she was living rather than merely enduring. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel invited Sarah and Emma to join him and Ethan at a community event near the river. Families filled the park. Children chased one another across the grass. Food vendors lined the walking paths. Music drifted through the warm air. Emma and Ethan immediately disappeared toward a face-painting booth. That left Sarah and Daniel walking slowly along the riverbank. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it felt surprisingly natural. Sarah glanced toward the children. "They get along well." Daniel smiled. "Better than I expected. They've become friends. So have we." The words slipped out before either of them could stop them. Sarah looked down. A small smile appeared. "Yes," she admitted. "We have." For a moment, they simply continued walking. Then Sarah asked a question she had been carrying for weeks. "Do you ever get tired?" Daniel laughed softly. "Every day." "No, I mean," she searched for the right words. "Do you ever get tired of helping people?" Daniel thought about it carefully. Then he shook his head. "Helping people isn't what makes me tired. What does? Watching good people struggle alone because they're afraid to accept help." Sarah lowered her eyes. The statement touched something deep inside her, because she knew exactly what he meant. For years, she had carried every burden by herself. Not because she wanted to, because she believed she had no other choice. Daniel continued walking beside her. "I've learned something over the years." "What?" "Strength isn't refusing support." He looked toward the river. "Strength is knowing when to accept it." Sarah was quiet. The old version of herself would have argued. The woman she was becoming simply listened, because she knew he was right. A few minutes later, they found an empty bench overlooking the water. The children were feeding ducks nearby. Their laughter echoed across the riverbank. Daniel watched them for a moment. Then he spoke. "You know, Ethan talks about Emma all the time." Sarah laughed. "Emma does the same thing." "Really?" "Every day." The shared amusement made both of them smile. For a while, they sat together in comfortable silence. Then Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not excitement. Not romance. Not the rush of emotions she remembered from her younger years. Something much deeper. Trust. The kind that forms slowly. The kind built through actions rather than promises. The kind that survives difficult days. As the sun began setting behind the river, painting the water gold and orange, Sarah realized something important. Daniel had never tried to rescue her. He had never treated her like someone broken. Instead, he had done something far more valuable. He had respected her enough to let her rebuild her own life. And somewhere along the way, Admiration had quietly become affection. Neither of them said it that afternoon. Neither of them rushed. Both had experienced enough pain to understand that meaningful relationships required patience. But as they stood to leave and walked toward their children together, each carried the same realization. What had begun as a simple act of kindness was becoming something neither of them had expected. Something worth protecting, and perhaps, in time, something worth calling love. 1 year after Sarah Mitchell walked out of Riverside Bistro without ordering a meal, life looked very different. The woman who had once counted every dollar before entering a restaurant now walked confidently through the doors of Carter Strategic Consulting each morning. She had built a successful career, secured a safe home for Emma, and slowly reclaimed the confidence that had been stolen from her years before. But the greatest change wasn't financial. It was emotional. For the first time in a long time, Sarah no longer viewed the world as a place filled only with dangers and disappointments. She had learned that some people could be trusted. Some people truly meant what they said, and some acts of kindness came without a hidden price. On a warm Saturday evening, Daniel and Sarah stood together at the community center, where dozens of local families had gathered for a free dinner. Children laughed around folding tables. Volunteers carried trays of food. Conversations filled the room with warmth and life. Emma proudly handed out napkins to guests, while Ethan helped serve bread. Watching them, Sarah smiled. Not long ago, she had been one of the people quietly accepting help. Now she was one of the people offering it. Daniel stepped beside her. "You seem happy." Sarah looked around the room. "I am." They watched as a nervous young mother entered with 2 small children. She hesitated near the doorway, clearly unsure whether she belonged. Sarah immediately recognized the expression. She had worn it herself. Without drawing attention to the woman, Sarah walked over and greeted her warmly. No pressure, no questions, no pity, just kindness. A simple welcome. When Sarah returned a few minutes later, Daniel smiled knowingly. "You opened the door." Sarah laughed softly, and she chose to walk through it. For a moment they stood in comfortable silence. Then Sarah slipped her hand into his. A year earlier, she had believed accepting help was a sign of weakness. Now she understood something completely different. Sometimes strength meant allowing others to stand beside you. Sometimes healing began with a single moment of kindness. And sometimes one open door could change the course of an entire life. As the evening sun faded beyond the windows, Sarah looked at the people gathered around the room and felt gratitude not for being rescued, but for being given the chance to rebuild. Because Daniel had never saved her life. He had simply seen her when she felt invisible. The rest she had done herself, and that was what made the story beautiful. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and share one act of kindness that changed your life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more inspiring stories that remind us all of one simple truth. A single open door can become the beginning of a brand new future.